Welcome back to Yoga Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Waycott. If you're new here, I've been teaching yoga for the past 14 years, and today I run a fully independent yoga business that doesn't rely on studio classes. I offer pre-registered yoga series for my community, as well as continuing education for yoga teachers. A really big part of my mission is sharing real conversations with yoga teachers around the world about what it's actually like to work in the modern yoga industry. And that is what Yoga Insider Podcast is for. I'm so glad that you're here. Let's dive into today's episode. All right, welcome back to another week of the podcast. I am glad to be here, and it has certainly been a busy teaching weekend. I feel like tomorrow will be kind of like my rest day to like recoup and get back to just like taking care of me, like going to a workout class and like just kind of like unwinding a little bit. And I also have Waylon here with me on the podcast today, my dog. He is under the desk and he's being a really good boy right now, but I kind of feel like he's going to be a pest at some point during the episode today because he hasn't been for his walk yet. And we're going to go for his walk once I finish recording this. But like, when we start to get to a certain point in the day and he like hasn't had his first walk yet, he goes and gets his toys and he starts squeaking them and he basically just like acts super annoying until I take him outside, which is completely understandable. So hopefully he won't put on too much of a show for us today. But if you hear squeaking or like weird sounds in the background, it is my dog. On Friday, this past weekend, I hosted a pop-up yoga class at the museum, which is where I run my pre-registered yoga classes. It's the Chilliwack Museum and Archives for anybody who lives locally to the Lower Mainland here in BC. And this year I've been experimenting with a few like pop-up style yoga classes, and I really like them as a way for people to come into the space and try it out without committing to a full series. Because my yoga classes run as a monthly pre-registered series, there isn't always room for drop-in students. And with the pop-ups, they create this really nice sort of low pressure environment or like low pressure entry point for people to come in and check out the space, get a feel for the class, just kind of experience it without any long-term commitment. And I also feel like there's something that some of my regular students who come every month look forward to as well, because it's just something that's a little bit different. It's outside of our typical practice schedule. And so, I had some regular students there, and I also had some students join who hadn't made it to the museum yet for a class, which was really great. And what's fun about the pop-up classes is that they are lighthearted. And I feel like I let people know ahead of time that like it's lighthearted, it's open level. My favorite part is that I always do like a fun playlist. So last time I taught a pop-up class a little earlier in the year, I made like a 90s, early noughts R&B, neo-soul kind of inspired playlist. And then this past weekend, it was like a reggae inspired playlist. And I don't know, I just have so much fun like DJing the yoga class. So I did that this weekend. And, from a business perspective, like from like running a yoga business perspective, I do think that running the odd like pop-up style class or class where kind of anybody can just pop in and try it out and get a feel for it is a really effective way to support the growth of your pre-registered classes, right? Like sometimes people just like to try things out first without fully committing to them. And so they kind of give people like a way in. And again, there's no pressure. So it just makes the experience more accessible because people know that they're not having to like lock in for a full month. And then on a practical level, I have been filling these pop-up classes with my email list, with my email newsletter. And I'm just sharing that because it is such a good reminder of the value of having an email list and being consistent with it, especially if you are an independent yoga teacher. I find it really refreshing to not have to rely on social media to fill all of my offerings. I am actively on social media. I try to post fairly consistently, especially like in Instagram stories. It's fun to share there. But it can also be a lot of work, right? When you have something that you want to sell and you're like constantly pushing it and creating content, and it doesn't always land, it doesn't always get in front of the right people. And just to have a newsletter and be able to like put out 1 or 2 emails to your audience and like fill up a workshop or fill up a special class just from that is like, I don't know, it's just such a relief. It's so nice. So if you don't have an email list, start an email list this year. Yeah. And then yesterday I taught a verbal cues masterclass, and there was such a good group of yoga teachers that joined. What I really appreciated was that there was yoga teachers from all different teaching backgrounds who showed up. So it wasn't just like one type of teacher. There were teachers who have worked with diverse populations, teachers who've worked in more clinical settings. There were chair yoga teachers. There was a yoga therapist. There was an Ashtanga yoga teacher. And it was just like, it was a rich environment to be in. And it was really fun to see teachers connecting with each other, like one-on-one, who maybe hadn't met each other before. And so we did a lot of teaching practice. And my biggest takeaway from the class yesterday was that as yoga teachers, we cannot underestimate or diminish the value of getting ourselves into rooms with other yoga teachers. I feel like it is so important to make an effort to do this from time to time and like get yourself into a room with yoga teachers who are not part of your like immediate circle necessarily. So maybe you teach in a studio and you have some yoga teacher friends there and you see them on a more regular basis, but coming out to, workshops or small trainings like this is just such a great way to be in proximity with other perspectives and like different ways of thinking, different ways of teaching. And I feel like it's really important to put ourselves into those kinds of environments. And I also want to acknowledge just another thing I was thinking about after yesterday is that it's not realistic for a lot of yoga teachers to just like leave the country or go away for long extended yoga trainings. Most people have jobs, people have families or caregiving responsibilities, and it's expensive. So these shorter trainings, like one of the reasons that I love them is that they give people that chance to come together. And they add up over time. Like they do make an impact on your teaching. And if you feel like you need like a little bit of a reset or like something to just kind of get you back into like a new rhythm with your teaching, like maybe you've had a break for a while and you're thinking about teaching again, I wouldn't overlook these smaller opportunities like just a day-long workshop, a day-long training, a weekend training if there is anything in your local community. I just feel like they can be really impactful. And I feel good about being able to offer these types of trainings in my own community. I think that like accessibility is really important. So something that stood out to me from the training yesterday was a conversation that came up a few different times about how easy it is for experienced yoga teachers, especially, to slip into autopilot when we are teaching. And I feel like this is especially true if you are teaching multiple classes a week or if you've been teaching a lot. And, over time, like we all develop different habits and patterns and like certain ways of speaking, and they're not necessarily bad, but we do just kind of get a little bit automatic sometimes. And I see this in myself. I find especially like when I am in a busy teaching season and maybe I've had a week where I've done a ton of teaching, which is not every week these days. Like it kind of ebbs and flows throughout the year, and that's on purpose. But if I am just kind of coming off the tail end of like a really busy teaching week or so, I feel like I catch myself kind of going into autopilot and like I'm saying things and like it's not what I meant to say, because it's like, yeah, maybe I'm not paying attention. And I feel like it shows up especially as a sign that I'm tired or that I've been teaching too much. And so these conversations really inspired me yesterday to give myself a bit of a challenge in my own yoga teaching moving forward. And this is something that I'm actively working on right now. And maybe it's something that you want to kind of integrate into your own teaching as well. So the challenge that I'm giving myself is to be more strategic with the cues that I use to facilitate mind-body connection. And I'm going to break that down for you in a little bit and give you some examples so you can start to maybe explore this same idea in your own yoga classes. So when I teach on verbal cues, I like to break them down into two main categories just for the sake of understanding. This is the framework that I use to understand verbal cues and explain them and teach them to other teachers. But there are definitely lots of different ways to approach this type of learning depending on your training and who your teachers are. So just know that like if I use one term to describe a type of verbal cues, like you might know a different term for it and it's not wrong. So the first category that I like to kind of give people are what I call directional cues. And this is an umbrella term that I use to describe the cues that are action-oriented. So these are the cues that we use to help move our students' bodies from point A to point B. These are the cues that we use to help organize our students' bodies in a pose and to help our students orient themselves in time and space, like on their yoga mat and in the room that they are practicing in. So that's like the first type of cue that I like to talk about. And the reason it always comes first is because I consider directional cues the foundation of your teaching. This is really like the most important part. This is what we really want to work with if we are new yoga teachers, especially, is getting our directional cues really clear and really concise so that we can move our students efficiently, like in and out of postures. And if you want to take a little bit of a deeper dive on this specifically, you can go back to my episode called Audit Your Verbal Cues, and I break down the framework that I like to use for directional cues in more detail. But yeah, especially if you're a new yoga teacher, like these are the cues that you want to focus on first. You want your directional cues to be proficient before you start adding on any extra like layers of refinement. So these cues are short, they're concise. That's what makes them effective. Think like step your right foot back, reach your arms up, press your hands down into the floor. Like just quick, simple cues that tell your students exactly what you want them to do with their bodies. Now, the second category is what I call experiential cues. And this is another big umbrella term that I use to describe a range of cues that can guide your students more deeply into their internal experience. So think of directional cues as like external experience, physical body, and then internal or experiential cues as like subtle body, or kind of like going inside, exploring our inner realms and inner landscape. So these are the cues that help facilitate a deeper mind-body connection. They are cues that connect your students to their imagination, cues that bring awareness to sensation, to breath, again, like the subtle layers of the body. And if you think about it, if a yoga class only has directional cues, if you're only giving your students instructions to move in and out of shapes, you might be missing out on some really beautiful like depth and richness in the practice. And it can feel a little bit mechanical if we're only speaking to the physical parts of the practice. So the experiential cues are where we bring in more depth, and that is what's going to make the practice feel more cohesive and more embodied for your students. These are the cues that are going to help your students like experience what they're actually doing. And this is the layer that I want to get more strategic with in my own teaching right now. So there are so many different, like what I'll call categories or internal reference points that we can draw from when we are crafting experiential cues. And often the direction that you take with your experiential cues is going to tie back to the theme of your class or to the specific focus or feeling that you're trying to get your students to connect to. For example, you might decide that you want to work with the breath, but the thing with experiential cues is that this is where we can get really specific. So the key here is specificity and like going deep. This is our chance to get deep. So we're not just cueing the breath, we're asking ourselves, what part of the breath do I want to draw attention to? Is it to the inhale? Is it to the exhale? Is it breath retention, space between the breath? Is it something to do with like the mechanics of the breath, the movement of the ribs, the movement of the diaphragm? Like, what are you speaking about specifically? What is it that you want your students to notice? And the thing with experiential cues is that they are informed by our own experience with the yoga practice. So the more we've practiced yoga and experienced movements and techniques in our own bodies, I feel like the easier it is to come up with these types of cues. Now, you can guide your students towards all sorts of different things with your experiential cues. So you can guide your students into a specific sensation, and you can have them notice, where is there more effort in your body? Where is there ease? Where do you feel a sense of stretching? Where do you feel more stability or maybe tension? You can connect to the mind. So think kind of like the kosha system, like the mind, the emotions, patterns in the body, patterns in the mind, patterns of resistance, the way that you pay attention to things, your habits. You might bring more awareness to the subtle body. You could use visual imagery. You could use metaphor to deepen their experience. And there's a lot of creative range here. There are a lot of different possibilities when it comes to creating experiential cues. So because I'm working on cueing with more intention and not falling into my own habitual patterns as a teacher, where maybe I'm just saying things to fill a space, I thought that I would share a few prompts that I'm using that you can use as well to create experiential cues that will land for your students. And the first prompt that I'll give you is notice. So try to start a sentence with notice. And ideally, the experiential cues come after the directional cues. So you've used your directional cues to get your students into a posture. For example, you're going to cue them into a low lunge from standing forward fold. With your directional cues, you could say something like, step your right foot back, lower your right knee to the ground, reach your arms up overhead. Low lunge. Okay, so we use like simple, concise language to get our students into a posture. And then once they're there, we could layer on an experiential cue. And so if I was going to start my experiential cue with notice, I could say something like, notice where you feel the most sensation in your body once my students are in the lunge. And what's nice about starting your sentence or your cue this way is that notice is a neutral invitation to observe. You're not telling your students what to feel, but you are giving them the space and encouraging them to observe themselves. Another way that you could start your experiential cue is with the word feel. Okay, so they're in a pose. Ideally, you're layering these in postures where students are okay to stay for a couple of breaths. I was saying yesterday, if your student is in a pose where it's like really, really effortful and maybe they're going to fall out or something like that, that might not be the place to add in the experiential cues. But using the word feel to start your sentences is another way to direct awareness, but it is still open-ended. So an example is feel how all four corners of your feet connect to the earth, right? So again, we're just directing awareness towards certain areas in the body, but it can be strategic. So say you were working with like the earth element as the theme for your practice, or you're working with like stability or groundedness as your theme. If I said something like, feel how all four corners of your feet connect to the earth, that's the kind of cue that is going to invite your students to really embody your theme, right? Like they're moving down the body into the feet. They're feeling the ground beneath them. And they are embodying that sense and that feeling without you even having to like explicitly name the theme of your class, right? So rather than just stopping, say in mountain pose and being like, all right, everyone, reconnect to the theme of earth element today. Like that feels kind of weird. Can you be a little bit more strategic with it, right? What's another way that we could get our students to connect to the earth, for example, without even explicitly saying it? Okay, so that's kind of like where the experiential cues come into play. And that's what I'm working on, is like tying them into my theme really, really well, and not just like saying experiential cues just for the sake of it. Another prompt that you can use to start your cues is see if you can. See if you can. So an example, see if you can let go of any unnecessary effort. So this is something that encourages curiosity, right? See if you can. What happens if you do this, right? And that actually brings me into the next prompt, which is, what happens if? So start your sentence with what happens if. This is such a fun one because I feel like this creates space to experiment and explore and try things out and see how they go without necessarily having to do them. So what happens if you lengthen your exhale breath, right? And then give people space to just notice for themselves, right? We're not telling our students what to feel. We're just guiding their awareness very gently so that they can observe and feel for themselves. So for me, this feels like a fun kind of like more challenging layer to work with in my own teaching right now. And it's certainly nothing brand new. It's not a new concept to me, but I was just more aware yesterday after being in the room with other yoga teachers. I was more aware of the fact that, yes, sometimes I can go onto autopilot in my teaching, or I can feel like I'm being repetitive. And it's a nice reminder to kind of put the microscope or the magnifying glass on ourselves and look at ourselves more closely and just ask, why am I saying that thing? Why do I always repeat that one cue in my classes? Is it there for a reason? Do my students really need me to say that? Or am I just saying it out of habit? Am I just filling the space because I'm feeling uncomfortable with silence in this moment? That is something that I really want to look more closely at. And yeah, I think that, there's always room for growth for us, even as experienced yoga teachers. The learning, the growing, the evolving, it never ends. And sometimes it's just about being more intentional with what we are already doing in our classes and what we already know. So this is the challenge that I am playing with right now. And if it resonates with you, I would invite you to explore it in your own classes as well. So is there anywhere with your language, if you already have directional cues in the bag and you want to kind of refine one step further, is there anywhere with your language that you can be more strategic? And is there a way that you can weave your theme into your class using your words in a really subtle way that can be felt and embodied by your students? So it's definitely not easy, but that is my challenge. And if this episode was helpful for you, if it resonates with you at all, definitely leave a rating or share it with another yoga teacher. It really helps this kind of work just get out into the community and reach other yoga teachers. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Yoga Insider Podcast. I will see you next time.